Hello, and welcome to Pondering the Orb. I'm your host, as always, the wandering fantasy author, Requard. Today we're going to enjoy some wonderful fantasy books and listen to some great music from old friends Eye of the Enemy and new friend La Avenue, and we're going to enjoy the adventure. Few books have such historical importance as our first old book of the third season, but this one is also deeply important to me. We all have those books that shape us, and discovering a mint first edition copy of Flashing Swords #1 in a little used bookstore in Holden's Beach, North Carolina was important for me both as a reader and the author I would become. Flashing Swords #1 is the creation of Lynn Carter, who is a divisive figure among genre historians, but few can deny his work had indelible influence in popularizing sword sorcery and heroic fantasy. Flashing Swords is an important point in the genre, reintroducing masters of the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s to a 1970s audience who took these stories and continued their traditions and passed them on to those that came after them, all the way to today. Also note the kick-ass Frazetta on the cover. Reading from The Merman's Children by Powell Anderson, this is from Flashing Swords #1, published by Doubleday in 1973. We are reading from Flashing Swords #1, edited by Lynn Carter. We are reading from The Merman's Children by Powell Anderson. Chapter 1. The Bishop of Viborg got Magnus Gregerson for his new archdeacon. This man was more learned than most, having studied in Paris, and he was upright and pious, but folk called him too strict, and said they liked no better to see him coming with his long, lean frame and his long, sour face than they liked to see any other black crow in their fields. The bishop felt one like that was needed, for laxity had set in during the years of strife that harried Denmark, after King Eric Plowpenny died. Riding along the eastern Judish coast as an episcopal provost, Magnus came to Owls, not the island, but a hamlet of the same name. It was poor and lonely, cut off to the south and west by deep woods, which ran but a pair of roads, to the north by Kongerslev Marsh, and to east by the Kattegat. Each September and October, its fishermen would join the thousands that made catches in the Sound during the Great Herring Run. Otherwise, their kind saw little of the outside world. They dragged their nets along the coast and farmed their thin-soiled acres until time and toil broke them, and they laid their bones to rest beside the small wooden church. Many old ways were still followed in steads like this. Magnus thought such doings heathenish, and bewailed himself that there were no ready way to stop them. Thus a baffled zeal grew doubly strong in him when he heard certain rumors about owls. None there would own to knowledge of what might have been happening since a day 14 years ago when Agniti came back out of the sea. Magnus got the priest alone and sturdily demanded the truth. Father Nudd was a gentleman, born in one of these tiny houses, who had long turned a blind eye to what he thought were minor sins that gave his flock some cheer in their bleak lives. But he was old now, and feeble, and Magnus soon wrung from him the full tale. The provost returned to Viborg with a holy flame in his eyes. He went to the bishop and said, "My lord, in making my rounds through your diocese, I found woefully many signs of the devil's work. But had I not looked to come upon him myself, no, say rather a whole nest of his foulest, most dangerous fiends. Yet this I did in the Strand hamlet Owls." "What mean you?" asked the bishop sharply, for he had also dreaded the return of the old witchy gods. "I mean that offshore is a town of merfolk." The bishop eased. "How interesting," he said. "I knew not that any were left in Danish waters." "They are not devils, my good Magnus. They lack souls, yes, like other beasts, but they do not imperil salvation as might the dwellers in an elf hill. Indeed, they seldom have aught to do with the tribe of Adam." "These are otherwise, my lord," answered the archdeacon. "Listen to what I have learned. 22 years ago lived near Owls a maiden hight Agneti Einer's daughter. Her father was a yeoman, well-to-do by his neighbour's reckoning, and she was very fair, so she ought to have made a good marriage. But one eventide she walked alone on the strand. A merman trod forth and wooed her. He lured her away with him, and she passed 8 years in sin and godlessness beneath the sea. At last she happened to bring her newest babe up onto a skerry that it might drink sunlight. This was in earshot of the church bells, and while she sat rocking the cradle, they began to chime. Homesickness, if not repentance, awoke in her. She went to the merman and begged leave to go hear again the world of God. He gave unwilling consent and took her ashore. Before he made her vow not to do 3 things: let down her long hair, as if she were unwedded, seek out her mother in the family pew, and bow down when the priest named the All-Highest. But each of these things she did, the first for pride, the second for love, the third for awe. Then divine grace drew the scales from her eyes, and she stayed on land. Afterward the merman came in search for her. It was another holy day, and he found her at Mass. When he walked into the church, the pictures and images turned their faces to the wall. None of the congregation dared lift a hand against him, for he was huge and strong and so heavy that he had left a track behind him even though it was summer and the street dry. He pleaded with her to come. He spoke of their children that wept for her, and well might have prevailed as for a time. For this is not a hideous race with fishtails, my lord. Save that they have broad, webbed feet and big, slanting eyes, and the men among them are beardless, and some have green and blue hair. On the whole, they look like beautiful humans. His own locks were as golden as hers. And he did not threaten. He spoke in tones of love and sorrow. Yet God strengthened Agnete. She refused him, and he went back beneath the waters. Her father had the prudence and the dowry to get her wed inland. They say she was never cheerful, and before long she died. If it was a Christian death, the bishop said, I cannot see that lasting harm was done. But the merfolk are still there, my lord, cried the provost. Fishermen see them often, ramping and laughing in the waves. Does that not make a poor toiler who dwells in a wretched hut with an ugly wife ill-content, yes, even questioning of God's justice? And when will another merman seduce another maiden, this time forever? That is more likely now that those children of Agnete and her lover are grown. They come ashore almost as a habit, and are striking up friendships with some of the boys and young men. Worse, with some of the girls. My lord, this is Satan's work. If we let souls be lost that were in our charge, how shall we answer on the last day? The bishop scowled and rubbed his chin. You have right. What shall we try, though? If the alesmen already do what is forbidden, a further ban will hardly check them. I know those stiff-necked fisher-folk. And if we send the king for knights and soldiers, how shall they go beneath the sea? Magnus raised a finger. It blazed from him. My lord, I have studied matters of this kind and know the cure. These merfolk may not be demons, but the soulless must ever flee when God's word is properly laid on them. Have I your leave to conduct an exorcism? You do, said the bishop shakingly, and is with my blessing. So it came that Magnus returned to Owls. More men-at-arms than usual clattered behind them, lest the villagers make trouble. They watched, some eager for any newness, some surly, a few weeping, as the archdeacon had him rowed out to a spot above the underwater town, and there, with bell, book, and candle, he solemnly cursed the sea people, and bade them in God's name forever be gone. Howard Andrew Jones is an important figure in the modern sword and sorcery scene, not only standing as the editor of Tales from a Magician's Skull magazine, but also as the creator of Hanuvar, a character that's beloved by S&S audiences today. A general, a hero, and avenger, Hanuvar seeks vengeance over the fall of Villanis, set against powerful sorcery, villains, and monsters aplenty, in a thrilling sword and sandals world with wonderful dashes of low magic befitting the form. His stories have been collected and rewritten in a novel form native to sword and sorcery in a composite novel titled Lord of a Shattered Land, which is the first of a two-part series that continues in The City of Marble and Blood and the Chronicles of Hanuvar. Let's read from Lord of a Shattered Land by Howard Andrew Jones, published by Baen Books in 2023. Lord of a Shattered Land, Chronicles of Hanuvar, Book 1, by Howard Andrew Jones. Preamble. When he was young, the Dervins say, Hanuvar swore an oath before his father and the gods. With one hand on an altar red with blood, he pledged to give no rest to Dervins, and to seek their end so long as he drew breath. Hanuvar's enemies spread this fable to explain his matchless drive, and with hubris of their kind, assumed themselves the center of his universe. Even those who knew a greater measure of the truth repeat the lies, so Hanuvar emerges as a figure ominous as a thunderhead. Anyone who knew him tell a different tale, though few of them are left, and none knew him half so well as I. While many have praised his guile and his skill, another gift too often goes unsung. He set fires in the hearts of those he met. If you marched with him for even a little while, you came to share his dream, and would hazard blood and soul to see it through. You ask what truly drove him on? The answer is a simple one. Love. He loved his daughter. He loved his people. He loved his city. The silver towers of sea-girt Volanus perished with its walls, as did the shining winged serpents who had called the city home since its founding. The Dervan legions wrought this end. They threw down the city's idols, and they melted down her altars, and they carted off her treasures. They sowed her fields with salt. His daughter and his people, they led away in chains. The Dervins dared this only after they had seen Hanuvar plummet to the cobalt waves. They jeered the name they once spoke with dread. Some few feared his death was false. They had worked some strange new scheme. They were mocked. Once, he had brought the Dervan Empire to its knees. Now legions had struck back, and they proudly boasted they had slain him with his city. You who read this know that they were wrong, but cannot guess the fuller tale, for I have never set it down. Long years have passed, and I pray I have time to tell it, and the skill at last to render it in a way that might have pleased him. And so, I sing of a man in the shadow of war. He crawled from the wine-dark sea onto an island at the world's edge. Only foes stepped forth to greet him. For any other, that would have been the end. For Hanuvar, it was only the beginning. Antirisosilos, the Hanuvid, Book 1. Chapter 1. The Way of Serpents. He had lived in darkness, among the unseen things that chittered in the walls. Now a shirtless, barefoot slave preceded him, the orange glare of his lantern dangling from an outthrust hand. Grim guards marched behind, identical in turquoise kilts. The tramp of their feet had such clockwork precision, Hanuvar left off numbering his own paces and counted theirs. The procession wound past the cell doors, standing silent and gray like so many tombstones, and into a hall stacked with wooden barrels and chests. Beyond lay the stairs, which led to blessed sunlight and an unpleasant end. 12 paces stretched between him and that firstmost step, then 10, and then the slave veered away, leading him under a stone archway to the right. Hanuvar counted these paces too. He would know the way even without a lantern. The turn under an ancient archway brought him to a hall awash with such brilliance Hanuvar narrowed his eyes. 3 days within the cell had left him challenged by the wall's torches. The corridor held a mystery greater than the flood of illumination. 3 men knelt beside a pile of stone bricks and a bucket of mortar. They shaped a low wall across the bottom of an open doorway. On the other side of the growing barrier, a shelf of jeweled goblets twinkled brilliantly, next to a small basket of pearls. Did the islanders mean to wall him up with the treasures? That made no sense. The ruler would earn a kingly fee for turning him over to the Dervan Empire. Hanuvar had known his fate the moment they found him half drowned on their beach. The slave set his lantern on the floor and genuflected at the stout man in ochre silks who stepped out over the growing wall. On your knees, one of the guards prodded Hanuvar with the butt of his staff. Hanuvar knelt. The stone was cold against his legs. I do not like your look. So saying, Narada's king stopped in front of him. Hanuvar had not only excellent vantage point from which to observe the ruler's sandals, speckled with polished jade and onyx, but to obtain his hostage. They had obligingly granted him a tarnished spoon, the handle of which he sharpened to a point and tucked into his belt. Yet he did not act. This meeting felt less like a prelude to Dervan arrest and more like an interview. He would bide his time. "You may rise," the king said, as though permitting a grand luxury. "Slow," one of the guards cautioned. Hanuvar obeyed, his eyes fixed upon the king's. Like Hanuvar himself, the king neared his 50th year, but beside their dark, olive-toned skin, Hanuvar found nothing similar in their appearance. The king's balding head was crowned with a diamond-studded headband, and his clean-shaven chin and cheeks were padded with fat. Hanuvar stood a full head taller, his shoulders broad, his scarred arms and legs corded with muscle. His dark hair, peppered with gray, was thick and full. He wore a dirty white knee-length tunic, belted at the waist. His gray and brown beard was more than a week overdue for trimming. "I have treated you well, General," the king said. "I hope you will remember that." Hanuvar remembered the dark cell with the meager food, the pillowless stone shelf, and the doom he knew they'd summon. He kept his expression bland. "I will remember all you've done for me." Like many tyrants, this king seemed to lack the capacity to perceive irony, though it might have been he heard it too rarely. He nodded once, as though he received the praise he was due, and then continued, "Circumstances being what they are, I'm willing to offer you an alternative to imprisonment and death at the hands of the Empire." Hanuvar said nothing. "Are you not curious?" He awaited details. "Speak on, O king." "They say you know the ways of the great serpents." Whatever the king meant by that, he clearly hoped for an answer in the affirmative, so Hanuvar gave him one. "I do." Pondering the Orb is happy to welcome back Eye of the Enemy, all the way from Melbourne, Australia, continuing their campaign of dominance and scratching in multiple international tours with some of the biggest names in metal. They're back with a new track. From Eye of the Enemy and released this year, this is All of It for All of Us.
marching, marching in the beauty of the day. A million darkened kitchens, a thousand hillocks gray, are touched with all the radiance that a sudden sun discloses. For people hear us singing, bread and roses, bread and roses.
The brainchild of Jesse Rubin Wilson, who helmed a slew of other great projects, La Avenue is a passionate love letter to retrowave music, full of 80s sunsets and glittering romance of yesteryear, but with an originality that sets it firmly today and in the now. With a slew of fantastic music already unleashed upon the world in pastel glory, this song is taken from the tremendous EP that came out in 2019, Cherry Crush. By the wonderful, beautiful La Avenue, this is Business Talk. And that's our show. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Pondering the Orb. Remember to check out all the books and music, and of course, to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Safe journeys.